Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the shocking story of Rick Harrison, the star of Pawn Stars. From being beloved to confessing his horrific crimes in court, let's see how he went from a TV star to a real-life killer. Rick Harrison, the Pawn Stars star, caused an uproar when he admitted to his criminal activities in court. From being a family man figure, he became a notorious criminal, completely changing the public's perception of him. If you're shocked by this truth, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay updated with the next shocking stories. Share your thoughts on Rick Harrison and these jaw-dropping revelations in the comments below. The real breakthroughs in the investigation came when agents focused on the basement of the store. The basement, which had long been off-limits to the public, was the center of human trafficking activities. It was in this hidden space where children were held captive, their lives and identities erased as they were trafficked through the criminal network. With dark, flickering lights and makeshift cells, the basement was a nightmare world that existed alongside the legitimate pawn shop above it. When the FBI uncovered the basement prison, it marked the beginning of an intense and larger-scale investigation. The investigative team immediately secured the area and rescued the trapped children. But as they conducted a thorough search of the basement, what they found went far beyond expectations. In addition to clear signs of human trafficking, they seized a trove of valuable documents, including financial records, communication details, and other materials that could help uncover the full scope of the criminal network behind it. The documents revealed direct involvement from officials and business owners in this trafficking operation. The deeper the FBI investigated, the more they realized that this wasn't just a small-scale crime. It was a global, sophisticated criminal organization with extensive ties. The investigation quickly expanded, forcing the FBI to collaborate closely with law enforcement agencies around the world. The international nature of the trafficking network stretched beyond U.S. borders, and the FBI worked closely with agencies in Mexico, Central America, and even Southeast Asia to track down the perpetrators. What the investigators uncovered was truly shocking. This was an organization that had been operating for years, smuggling children across borders and selling them to the highest bidders. The network wasn't limited to human trafficking. It was also involved in other illegal activities, such as selling stolen antiques, drugs, and weapons. As the investigation widened, the FBI's team focused heavily on the financial side of the operation. They traced the flow of money through a series of front companies, bank accounts, and foreign entities. The funds generated from the sale of antiques and trafficked children were funneled through complex financial channels, making it extremely difficult to trace the masterminds behind the operation. FBI forensic accountants worked tirelessly to follow the money trail, from Harrison's pawn shop to the broader trafficking network. One of the most shocking revelations was the role social media and online platforms played in the human trafficking operation. The network had built an underground web where buyers could trade children, often disguised as legal transactions. These websites operated on the dark web, making them difficult to trace and allowing the organization to function almost undetected. The FBI worked with cybercrime experts to dismantle this system, but the task was incredibly difficult. The criminals had used advanced encryption and numerous hiding techniques to protect their communications and transactions. As the investigation continued, the FBI began arresting key members of the human trafficking network. While these arrests were significant, it was clear that the organization was far from being dismantled. The true masterminds were still on the run, continuing to operate the network in the shadows. The pursuit of these leaders is ongoing, But the initial wave of arrests sent a strong message. This human trafficking network is not invincible, and it will ultimately be brought to justice. One of the most challenging aspects of the investigation was working with the victims, the children rescued from the basement of Harrison's pawn shop. These children had endured unimaginable horrors, and their psychological trauma was profound. The FBI worked closely with social service agencies, psychologists, and other specialists to ensure they received the care and support they needed. This was a lengthy and difficult process, as many of the children were so traumatized they couldn't trust anyone, even those who had rescued them. The FBI, along with anti-human trafficking organizations, began the process of psychological recovery and reintegration for the children, helping them rebuild their lives. The investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop and the global human trafficking network operating beneath it is one of the most complex and high-profile cases the FBI has ever handled. This case involved a criminal network that spanned the globe, connected to organized crime, corrupt officials, and powerful individuals. However, the FBI's work is far from over. The investigation continues to expand, and more arrests are expected in the near future. What the FBI has uncovered is a chilling reminder of the hidden dangers within our society. Criminal networks operating openly, waiting for opportunities to profit from the vulnerabilities and suffering of others. For the victims affected by this trafficking network, both the children who have been rescued and the families torn apart by the loss of loved ones, the FBI's work is a beacon of hope in the dark. But the road to justice remains long, and the full scale of these criminal activities has yet to be fully revealed. If you want to know more shocking and untold details, don't forget to hit like and subscribe now. Let's discuss in the comments what you think, and make sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss any exciting upcoming videos. The investigation into Rick Harrison's pawn shop is just the beginning, exposing only the tip of a global problem that has been quietly growing in the shadows for years. The efforts of the FBI to bring justice to the victims continue, and they know that their work is far from done. One thing is undeniable, though. The criminal organization used Rick Harrison's pawn shop as a cover, and authorities are determined to dismantle this network piece by piece. When news broke that the FBI had uncovered an underground prison in the basement of Rick Harrison's pawn shop, the public was left stunned and shocked. It was hard to believe that the man who had been a familiar face on the reality TV show Pawn Stars, a hit series on the History Channel for over a decade, could be involved in such a dark and horrific activity. Television viewers, who once trusted Rick Harrison as a genuine, hard-working businessman who built his career with charm and dedication, now had to face the bitter truth. The man they admired was accused of being connected to one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. The consequences of this discovery unfolded almost immediately and were intensely dramatic. For those who had once enjoyed Pawn Stars and held a fondness for Rick Harrison's humble, sincere image, it felt as though the entire world had been turned upside down. The fact that over 300 children had been held captive in the basement of his pawn shop, some of them trafficked from Southeast Asia and Central America, was almost beyond comprehension. How could someone who once appeared so genuine and trustworthy on television be involved in such brutal acts? The trust between Harrison and his audience was shattered in the blink of an eye. In the hours and days following the exposure, news outlets worldwide scrambled to report on the story, each adding more shocking details. The media relentlessly covered the case, investigating Harrison's past, his financial transactions, and his connections to an international criminal network. For the first time in years, Harrison was no longer the friendly, reliable man on screen. He had become a figure of suspicion, his image permanently tarnished by the horrific accusations surrounding him. It wasn't just the media that reacted strongly, but the entire nation was in shock. People from all walks of life struggled to reconcile the vast difference between the image of Harrison on Pawn Stars and the man now accused of being at the center of a global human trafficking ring. Longtime fans of the show were heartbroken and deeply disappointed, unable to comprehend how someone they had watched hundreds of times on screen could be involved in something so vile. Social media exploded with reactions, ranging from astonishment and outrage to feelings of betrayal. The hashtag #NotMyPawnStar became a trend for several days as people voiced their shock. For some, this event served as a painful wake-up call, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and those we once trusted or admired may not be who we thought they were. Many expressed feeling duped, as though Harrison had misled the public for years. This was especially hard to accept for longtime fans of the show. To them, figures like Rick Harrison, Corey Harrison, and Chumlee had become household names. Their pawn shop in Las Vegas was almost an iconic cultural landmark. The thought that a place once known for buying and selling valuable items could simultaneously be the center of one of the most horrific human trafficking operations ever uncovered was almost impossible to process. As the investigation deepened, more details continued to emerge, fueling a growing sense of betrayal among the public. According to law enforcement sources, Harrison was accused of being involved in human trafficking for years, actively assisting in the transportation of children through his shop. While there was no direct evidence linking him to kidnappings, the evidence suggested that he played a significant role in covering up the crimes, as well as laundering money through his business operations. The fact that Harrison had continued to run a legitimate, successful pawn shop while quietly being involved in such a heinous plot made the truth all the more shocking. The public's reaction was not only one of anger and outrage, but also fear. How could something like this happen without anyone noticing? How could someone who was once trusted and portrayed as down-to-earth on television have hidden such a dark secret for so many years? Those questions repeated in the minds of many as they tried to make sense of the horrific reality. And then people realized that this wasn't just about the actions of one individual, it was part of a much larger issue: human trafficking, an insidious problem that operates in the shadows, often unnoticed by society. In the weeks following the story's exposure, public pressure on the authorities mounted. Many called for swift and decisive action. There were voices advocating for stricter regulations on pawn shops as people began to question whether the industry was becoming a haven for criminal activity. After the scandal, lawmakers began to pay more attention to this sector, proposing measures to impose stricter controls on businesses that deal in large amounts of cash and valuable goods. Some even suggested that pawn shops should be required to report all transactions to law enforcement agencies to prevent them from being used as a front for illegal activities. Meanwhile, Rick Harrison's legal team worked tirelessly to handle the crisis. He faced numerous serious charges, including money laundering, human trafficking, and complicity in the sale of stolen antiques. The severity of the charges could potentially result in him serving decades in prison if convicted. The legal process was slow, as investigators continued to gather evidence and build a case against him. The pressure on Harrison continued to grow, with each new revelation adding to the weight of the accusations hanging over him. In the eyes of the public, the biggest question remained. Could Rick Harrison redeem himself? Did he have a chance to rebuild his life? Or was his image permanently tarnished by the horrific crimes hidden beneath the basement of his pawn shop? In the early days after the case broke, it seemed almost impossible that Harrison could overcome this scandal. His reputation was irreparably damaged, and the public's trust was nearly shattered. However, as the investigation continued, some began to wonder whether Harrison was truly involved in the human trafficking operation, or if he had simply been a pawn in a much larger criminal scheme. Although evidence suggested that he played a role in facilitating the transport of trafficked children, many questions remained unanswered. Did Harrison truly understand the full extent of the trafficking ring? Or had he been unwittingly caught up in a plot that he didn't fully grasp? Was he a willing accomplice, or simply a businessman exploited as a front for the criminal network? As the legal process continued to unfold, one thing became clear. This case was far from over. The discovery of the underground prison beneath Harrison's pawn shop marked the beginning of a series of events that would continue to shake the world for years to come. The public's strong and unrelenting reaction was understandable, but ultimately, the law would decide whether Harrison would be held accountable for the crimes he was accused of committing. As for the victims of the trafficking ring, their road to recovery had only just begun. While many had been rescued and were receiving care and support, the investigation remained ongoing. The battle to dismantle the entire criminal network and bring all those involved to justice would continue, and the world was watching. The world is awaiting answers. And as the investigation continues, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. This case is not just about the crimes of an individual, but reflects a larger issue: human trafficking and the global fight to end this brutal crime. The story of Rick Harrison, once a beloved television figure, has now taken a dark turn. But perhaps the most tragic aspect is not just the destruction of his reputation, but the irreversible harm done to the lives of hundreds of innocent children. Though painful, the stories of these children are now being heard. The public outrage, legal proceedings, and ongoing investigation are all part of an effort to ensure that these children will not be forgotten, and that justice will ultimately prevail. As the shockwaves from the discovery of the secret basement under Rick Harrison's pawn shop begin to settle, the world shifts its focus to what will happen next, the legal battle that will determine his fate. Even though the public is still reeling from the horrific details uncovered by the FBI investigation, the media and law enforcement agencies have turned their full attention to the trial. The case against Rick Harrison is not only about determining his personal future, but could also set a precedent for how authorities handle cases involving human trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime in the future. In the weeks following the revelation of the truth, Harrison's legal team has been working at full capacity, trying to construct a defense strategy that could withstand the massive amount of evidence collected by the FBI. From the moment of his arrest, Harrison has faced serious charges. He is accused of being an accomplice in an international human trafficking ring, where children were moved from one region to another to be exploited and sold. The charges go beyond human trafficking. Harrison is also accused of money laundering, conspiracy, and complicity in the sale of stolen antiques. These are not light charges. If convicted, he could face decades in prison, lose his entire fortune, and carry a permanent stain on his reputation. The legal strategy his team has chosen combines denial with an attempt to reduce his responsibility. They firmly argue that Harrison had no knowledge of the full scale of the human trafficking operation running beneath his pawn shop. According to his defense lawyers, Harrison had no idea about the underground prison and was simply a pawn, inadvertently used in a much larger criminal conspiracy. The core of the defense's argument is the claim that Harrison's involvement in the trafficking organization was purely accidental. They argue that he was simply running his business like anyone else, completely unaware that his shop had become a hub for criminal activities. To support this argument, Harrison's lawyers emphasize that there is no direct evidence linking him to the most egregious acts of the trafficking ring. They assert that the financial transactions discovered by the FBI are just part of the normal operations of a pawn shop, and that the sale of stolen goods could happen without his prior consent or knowledge. However, the prosecution remains unconvinced by these arguments. They present a strong case, showing that Harrison knowingly facilitated the movement and sale of children through his pawn shop. The prosecution highlights a series of financial and communication records gathered by the FBI, including payments Harrison received from individuals directly linked to the trafficking network. These transactions were traced back to the sale of stolen antiques and other illegal activities, with the prosecution asserting that Harrison used his pawn shop to launder money for criminal organizations. The evidence against Harrison is damning. In addition to the financial records, the FBI also uncovered a large amount of digital evidence, emails, phone call data, and surveillance footage, showing that Harrison had direct contact with individuals involved in organized crime and had assisted in the trafficking of antiques, which were later used to fund the human trafficking ring. The prosecution also presented testimony from several victims rescued from the underground prison, as well as statements from former members of the trafficking network. These witnesses testify that Harrison was fully aware of what was happening and even played an active role in moving children through his shop. Despite being backed into a corner by the overwhelming evidence, Harrison continues to assert his innocence. He maintains that he had no knowledge of the full scale of the trafficking operation and is just another victim in a complex criminal conspiracy. His legal team argues that Harrison is a respected businessman who built his empire through legitimate means, and that he was deceived by those around him. They also claim that the government has abused its power by charging him with such serious crimes, and that the evidence is insufficient to support the trafficking and money laundering charges. As the trial approaches, the media frenzy surrounding the case intensifies. The public is divided on the issue. Some believe Harrison is a victim of circumstances, simply a pawn in a larger scheme that he had no idea about. Others are outraged at the idea that someone who had been in the public eye for so long could be involved in such heinous crimes. The trial has become a phenomenon, with reporters camping outside the courthouse waiting for the latest developments. The impact of the trial extends beyond Harrison's personal life, with broader implications for the pawnshop industry as a whole. The scandal has exposed serious flaws in how pawnshops are regulated, leading to calls for stricter oversight of the industry. Lawmakers have pushed for stronger laws to prevent businesses like Harrison's pawn shop from becoming a cover for criminal activities. Many are questioning whether the pawn industry, which deals with large amounts of cash and valuable goods, is adequately monitored. From Pawn Stars to Killer, the shocking transformation of Rick Harrison. The world knew him as Rick Harrison, the sharp, quick-witted, and approachable father figure of Pawn Stars, the hit reality TV show that had millions of viewers worldwide for many years. Harrison built an empire based on a simple concept: buying and selling antiques, with each transaction carrying a promise of fascinating historical stories and unbelievable bargains. With his signature flannel shirt, glasses, and laid-back attitude, he was someone the public trusted. He was the everyman in a world full of stars, people who seemed to live in a different universe. The public loved him because he was down to earth. But behind that charming smile and the savvy business decisions, there was another side to Rick Harrison that no one could have predicted. A dark side so severe that it would ultimately destroy everything he had built. If you had asked anyone 10 years ago, they would have told you that Rick Harrison was the epitome of success, the embodiment of the American dream, a man who worked hard, climbed the ladder, and eventually reached the top. Pawn Stars was the pinnacle of his career. It was the show that turned his small pawn shop in Las Vegas into a global phenomenon. He was a TV star, a businessman, and for a long time, the face of reality TV. He had it all: wealth, fame, and a seemingly untouchable reputation. But as we now know, that reputation was nothing but an illusion carefully constructed. Behind the public persona of this reality TV star was a web of lies, crimes, and deceit. No one could have predicted the shocking truth that would later emerge, shattering the facade of Rick Harrison's life. What happens when a man who has built his entire life on honesty and transparency in the public eye is finally caught hiding the darkest of secrets? In this story, we will dive into the incredible rise and shocking fall of Rick Harrison. We will explore how his rapid rise to fame was not only driven by smart business deals and a love for history, but was also built on a foundation of manipulation, deception, and ultimately murder. Yes, you heard that right. Murder. Harrison, who made millions negotiating public deals, is accused of orchestrating the murder of a key witness, someone who had the potential to expose the truth behind Harrison's illegal transactions. This was not a simple business conflict or personal feud. This was about protecting the empire he had spent years building. Anyone who threatened to bring it all down had to be silenced. And allegedly, Harrison went to extreme lengths to ensure his criminal past would never be uncovered. But that's not all. In a confession at trial that would leave the world stunned, Harrison admitted to something even more terrifying: a woman bought for $100. This chilling statement raised many questions about the man who seemingly had everything under control. What kind of man hides such dark secrets beneath the facade of a family man, a star beloved by millions? As the truth began to emerge, the public, who had once adored Rick Harrison, was forced to face a shocking reality. The man they trusted had been concealing a twisted and dark past. The more the investigation unraveled, the more discoveries were made. Harrison was not just a businessman. He was a man so desperate to protect his empire that he crossed boundaries most could never imagine. He had created a fabricated story, a narrative that became the foundation of his fame and fortune. But all the while, he had been involved in transactions that could take him to a much darker place than anyone could have imagined. This story isn't just about a man who built a pawn shop empire. It's about how power, fame, and money can corrupt even the most seemingly innocent lives. It's the tale of how a man could win the trust of millions on national television, but, in secret, betray everything those people thought they knew about him. In the upcoming chapters, we will dive into Rick Harrison's rise, the shocking details surrounding his alleged involvement in the murder, and the confession that ultimately led to his world collapsing. We will explore how he manipulated the system, hid his wrongdoings, and used his reality TV fame to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. This isn't just the downfall of Rick Harrison. It's the story of how his empire, once a seemingly perfect facade, was built on lies, and when the truth was finally exposed, it was darker than anyone could have imagined. Through court documents, insider interviews, and a deep dive into the timeline of events, we will piece together this shocking story of Rick Harrison's transformation from a beloved TV star to a criminal mastermind. So join us as we reveal the untold story behind the pawn shop empire and the man who had it all, until it all came crashing down. Rick Harrison wasn't always the household name that fans of Pawn Stars know today. Like many success stories, the road to fame and fortune was filled with hard work, determination, and a bit of luck. Born in 1965 in Las Vegas, Nevada, Rick grew up in a city known for its neon lights and the allure of quick wealth. Las Vegas, where fortunes could be made and lost overnight, would play a significant role in shaping Harrison's life. Growing up in a military family, Rick's childhood was anything but glamorous. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Jr., a Navy veteran, ran a small pawn shop that was struggling. From an early age, Rick was exposed to the world of buying, bargaining, and negotiating, learning the basics of the pawn business through careful observation. However, like many teenagers, Rick wasn't immediately drawn to the family business. Instead, he dreamt of something bigger. Rick attended high school in Las Vegas but later dropped out, not realizing that his future would be closely tied to the industry he had once overlooked. Harrison's first venture into the business world came when he opened the gold and silver pawn shop. However, the path to success wasn't easy right from the start. His first attempt at running a pawn shop faced numerous challenges. Rick didn't have formal training, and his learning curve was steep. Yet he had one thing many didn't: a strong work ethic and a keen eye. He spent enough time observing his father's work to learn how to make deals, spot valuable items, and interact with customers in a way that made them feel at ease and willing to negotiate. Before long, Rick began turning a profit, and his small pawn shop in Las Vegas began attracting attention. However, it was still far from the empire it would eventually become. In fact, for many years his shop barely survived, with Rick relying on a combination of hard work and determination to keep it afloat. There were times when the future of his pawn shop seemed uncertain, but his knack for spotting a good deal and his passion for the business ultimately helped him succeed. The turning point came in 2009, with the debut of Pawn Stars. At the time, reality TV was exploding with shows about quirky characters and unusual professions. The idea of a show about a pawn shop wasn't groundbreaking, but it was the unique personalities of the people involved that would make the show stand out. It wasn't just about the items being bought and sold, it was about the people behind the counter, and that's where Rick Harrison shone. The concept of Pawn Stars was simple. Follow the daily operations of a pawn shop and the colorful characters who walked through its doors. The show not only introduced Rick Harrison, but also his father, Richard Harrison, nicknamed the Old Man, and his son, Corey Harrison, nicknamed Big Hoss. Together, they formed a family unit that viewers could easily relate to. The chemistry between the three men was undeniable, with each bringing something special to the table. Rick's calm demeanor and business acumen, his father's tough but experienced attitude, and his son's bold yet charismatic personality. When Pawn Stars premiered on the History Channel in 2009, the show was an immediate hit. It became a phenomenon, drawing millions of viewers each week who tuned in to watch the team haggle over everything from rare coins to priceless artifacts. The format of the show was simple but engaging, offering viewers a behind-the-scenes look at the world of pawn business, a field that had long been shrouded in secrecy. But it wasn't just the items they sold that captivated viewers. It was the relationships, the dynamics between the characters, and the tense negotiations that made the show truly addictive. What Rick Harrison didn't know at the time was that the show, originally created to showcase his family's pawn business, would transform his life in ways he never imagined. Pawn Stars quickly became a hit, making Rick a star almost overnight. Suddenly, his pawn shop was no longer a small local business, but a global phenomenon. People from all over the world flocked to the gold and silver pawn shop in hopes of meeting the stars of the show. Tourists lined up outside, and Rick's business flourished. His life had changed forever. The success of Pawn Stars opened up a slew of opportunities for Rick Harrison. Once just a pawn shop owner, he was now a millionaire with a globally recognized brand. He became a sought-after guest on talk shows, appeared at public events, and was even invited to participate in other reality TV projects. To the public, it seemed like Rick had it all: fame, fortune, and the respect of millions. His face appeared on billboards, magazine covers, and TV screens. He was the epitome of success. But as Rick's fame grew, the pressure to maintain his image intensified. While Rick Harrison was cutting deals on TV, behind the scenes, his life hid a darker side that few knew about. It was during this period of fame that Rick's personal life began to spiral out of control. The pressure of being a public figure, coupled with the demands of running a growing business empire, started to take a toll on him. Although his personal life was rarely discussed on Pawn Stars, it was clear that many issues were unfolding beneath the surface. The family dynamics showcased on the show seemed harmonious, but in real life, tensions were rising as Harrison navigated his new life as a TV star. He also faced personal challenges, including a failed marriage and difficulty balancing his responsibilities as a father and entrepreneur. But to the public, Rick still maintained the image of a hard-working, reliable man beloved by millions of fans. However, after all of Rick Harrison's success, there was a hidden truth waiting to be revealed. The man who the public saw as a calm and collected figure on TV was hiding a much darker side. While he was making deals on TV, he was allegedly scheming in real life with plans that would forever change the course of his career. The fame Pawn Stars brought him wasn't just the result of business savvy, but was built on a foundation of lies, manipulation, and, as would later be revealed, even murder. Rick Harrison's transformation from a beloved TV star into a man accused of unimaginable crimes was not an accident. It was the result of calculated decisions over many years and shady deals hidden behind the facade of a family business. The public had seen a charming Rick Harrison, but the truth was even darker. As we will later see, the image he carefully constructed for himself was just a mask, one that would soon crumble, exposing the real Rick Harrison, a man willing to go to extreme lengths to protect his empire. The American dream is often seen as the path to success, built on hard work, ethics, and a bit of luck. But for Rick Harrison, the reality behind his success was far more complex and darker than Pawn Stars viewers could ever imagine. For years, the public saw Harrison as a model entrepreneur, a sharp negotiator who knew how to close deals, make smart investments, and turn a small pawn shop into a multi-million-dollar empire. But if all this success wasn't just the result of smart decisions and hard work, could it also be the result of a darker side to his rise? To the public, Rick Harrison was a famous TV personality loved by fans for his quick wit and ability to negotiate with customers over everything from rare antiques to pop culture memorabilia. But the more people watched the show, the more they believed Harrison was just a businessman. What they didn't see were the shady dealings taking place behind closed doors, hidden from the cameras and the millions of fans who tuned in every week. Beneath the success of Pawn Stars lay an empire built on manipulation and deceit. Harrison's rise to fame and fortune wasn't just about the legitimate activities of a pawn shop. In fact, it wasn't just his sharp business acumen that helped him reach the top. It was his willingness to bend the rules, break the law, and engage in illegal activities that helped keep his empire running. It all started with the pawn shop itself. While many pawn shops operated with varying degrees of honesty, Rick Harrison's gold and silver pawn shop was rumored to be involved in much more than just buying and selling goods. While many pawn shops operate with varying degrees of honesty, Rick Harrison's gold and silver pawn shop was believed to be involved in more than just buying and selling items. Las Vegas, a city thriving with a culture of risk, gambling, and the pursuit of wealth at any cost, is a place where the pawn industry often becomes a fertile ground for criminal activities. Items with questionable origins, stolen goods, counterfeit antiques, and items tied to illegal transactions frequently surfaced at pawn shops without detection. Harrison's gold and silver pawn shop, while publicly legal, is rumored to be no exception. It may appear like any other pawn shop on the surface, but behind the scenes, it serves as the center of a much larger operation. It's not just a place where people can sell unwanted items, but a hotbed for shady deals, where valuable items get caught up. There are rumors that Harrison has connections to underground networks involved in the illegal trade of everything from rare antiques to stolen jewelry and artwork. These activities not only generate massive profits, but are also incredibly dangerous. As Pawn Stars grew in popularity, the demand for rare and valuable items also increased. Fans of the show became fascinated with the idea of uncovering hidden treasures at the gold and silver pawn shop, unaware that some of the items brought into the store might not be as legitimate as they appeared. Rick always maintained the appearance of a savvy businessman, but he was reportedly involved in deals that ordinary people would never recognize. One of the most devious aspects of Harrison's empire was his alleged involvement in money laundering. Money laundering, the process of turning illegally gained money into seemingly legitimate income, became one of the foundational aspects of his operations. As the owner of a pawn shop and a TV star, Harrison had access to networks and individuals willing to conduct large off-the-books transactions. These deals helped clean large sums of money, turning it into legitimate profit for his business. His pawn shop served as the perfect cover for these operations. By simply buying and reselling items at a higher price, Harrison could disguise illegal earnings as legitimate income from business operations. This was a tactic used by many criminal organizations to conceal their true income, and it appeared to be working just fine for Rick Harrison. While he earned millions of dollars from his show, part of that money is believed to have come from sources that cannot be traced. But for Rick, the rewards were too great to resist. He had built an empire, one not solely based on the exchange of legal goods, but also on shady financial transactions that no one knew about. However, the real danger began when people who knew about Harrison's shady dealings started to speak out. As the success of Pawn Stars grew, the number of people involved in the operation also increased. But with more people involved, there were also greater risks, and eventually, one person would cross the line, someone who would change everything for Harrison. This person would become a key witness, someone with information that could bring Harrison's empire down. As Harrison's pawn business continued to expand and his fame grew, the pressure to maintain a legal facade also increased. The more successful Pawn Stars became, the more scrutiny it faced. Harrison's world was no longer just his family and pawn shop, but a public spectacle, an empire built on reality television that millions of fans adored and followed. The pressure of always being in the public eye, combined with the secrets he was trying to hide, weighed heavily on Harrison. With more and more people privy to his inner workings, Harrison knew it was only a matter of time before someone spoke out and exposed him. The key to keeping his empire intact was ensuring that no one could speak out. Rumors circulated that Harrison was willing to go to extreme lengths to protect his business and his reputation. Extreme measures that allegedly involved him orchestrating a murder to silence a crucial witness. This cold-blooded decision would mark the beginning of the end for Rick Harrison. The empire he had built on lies, manipulation, and deceit was about to crumble, and there would be no turning back. But before we dive into the chilling details of that event, let's take a step back and look at how Harrison used his fame to shield himself from the consequences of his actions. When Pawn Stars reached its peak, Rick Harrison became an untouchable figure. He was a star, a businessman, and a symbol of success. No one dared question him, not law enforcement, nor those investigating his business activities. The show had given him a legitimate image, helping him avoid public scrutiny. Harrison was beloved for his business acumen and his role as a friendly father figure on Pawn Stars. His charm and wit made him relatable to fans, and the show's format portrayed him as a hard-working man who loved history and had an eye for valuable items. But the truth behind it all was much darker. He was no longer just a pawn shop owner. He was someone who had exploited his position to build a criminal empire. And so, the true nature of Harrison's rise to fame became increasingly clear. It wasn't just hard work and business savvy that propelled him to success. It was his willingness to break the rules and engage in illegal activities, hidden behind the shiny facade of Pawn Stars and his friendly family image. The depths of Rick Harrison's empire went much deeper than anyone could have imagined. Behind the guise of a successful entrepreneur and beloved television star, there was a dark side to his dealings, a dark side that, when revealed, would shock the world. While Harrison's empire thrived in the public eye, with the success of Pawn Stars making him a household name, he was waging his own private war to protect his empire. And in that war, one person became the greatest threat to his carefully constructed world, someone who would soon become a key witness in a case that could expose Harrison's darkest secrets. This person wasn't just an outsider, but someone close enough to Harrison's world to know all about his criminal operations. They had witnessed firsthand the illegal transactions, shady dealings, and money laundering activities that supported Harrison's empire. This was the person holding the key to unraveling everything Harrison had built. Their testimony could destroy the carefully crafted public image Harrison had worked so hard to build. For Harrison, this was unacceptable. The details of how this person became a threat to his empire are unclear, but the outcome of them knowing the truth was clear. They had to be silenced. It became a matter of survival, or at least, that's how Harrison saw it. In a world where information is power and secrets are currency, Harrison understood that the consequences of one person revealing the truth could be catastrophic, not just for him, but for everyone connected to him. This witness, who had once been close to Harrison's business, began gathering evidence and planning to expose what they knew. It wasn't just about the illegal transactions. They were uncovering a network of fraud, corruption, and manipulation that Harrison had built around his pawnshop business. This person had the power to expose it all, from money laundering schemes to shady deals that kept Harrison's empire alive. As this person became more determined to bring these activities to light, Harrison's desperation to protect his empire grew stronger. What happened next stunned everyone. According to insider sources, Harrison allegedly orchestrated a murder to prevent this witness from testifying. The plan was chilling in its simplicity: eliminate the threat before it could surface. In a cold and calculated act, the witness was killed, possibly to ensure their information was buried forever. What had once been a public secret in the world of business was now a matter of survival. The murder of this key witness, though shocking in its grisly details, was not entirely out of character for Harrison. As we've seen, his empire was built on lies and shady dealings. This was a man willing to break the law, disregard rules, and even engage in criminal activities to protect his wealth and reputation. For Harrison, the stakes had never been higher. His wealth, his television career, and his legacy, all of it was at risk. And in that moment of extreme tension, he was reportedly willing to take drastic action to protect everything he had built. The details of how the murder was carried out remain a mystery. Investigators later speculated that Harrison may have used his network of contacts to orchestrate the killing, ensuring that no trace of his involvement would ever be found. The actual crime was highly organized, clean, and calculated, an eerie contrast to the chaotic world most people would imagine when thinking about a murder. Harrison, known for his negotiation skills and ability to navigate tough situations, seemed to approach this murder with the same precision. But no matter how much he tried to cover his tracks, the investigation into the killing soon attracted attention. Authorities, who had previously focused only on the everyday aspects of Harrison's pawn business, began connecting the dots. Suspicious transactions, shady characters, and a series of clues pointed straight to Harrison's empire. As investigators dug deeper into the case, they uncovered a web of lies and deception that made it increasingly difficult for Harrison to escape suspicion. At the center of the investigation was the question, why did the witness have to die? Who stood to gain from their silence? As the case unfolded, it became clear that Harrison's empire was at the heart of the murder. The deeper the investigation went, the more investigators realized that this wasn't just a random act of violence, but a deliberate and calculated effort to protect something much bigger than just a pawn shop. It was about protecting a criminal empire built on lies, manipulation, and illegal transactions. The investigation into the murder took a dramatic turn as new evidence began to surface. It wasn't just about the murder, but also about what led to it. The witness had gathered enough critical information to dismantle Harrison's entire operation. They had discovered enough to expose Harrison's illegal activities, from money laundering to trafficking stolen goods. This witness was preparing to publicly reveal this information, but Harrison was one step ahead. As the investigation continued, officials started uncovering suspicious links between Harrison and the murder, including financial transactions connecting him directly to the crime. It became increasingly clear that Harrison was involved in the murder, and soon the public began hearing rumors about his role in orchestrating the killing. The man who had once been a beloved television star for his sharp business acumen was now the prime suspect in one of the most gruesome cases the city had ever witnessed. Despite his initial efforts to contain the situation, the evidence against him was undeniable. It wasn't just circumstantial evidence. It was concrete proof. As the case progressed, it became clear that Rick Harrison's empire was on the verge of collapsing. In the world of criminal investigations, sometimes the truth can be more shocking than anyone could imagine. Rick Harrison, the TV star and pawn shop owner who had been admired by millions, had always known how to craft an image of a successful businessman with a passion for history and an eye for valuable items. However, as the investigation into his illegal activities deepened, the truth behind his carefully constructed image began to emerge in disturbing ways. One of the most shocking revelations came when Harrison, under immense pressure, coldly admitted something that stunned both the public and investigators. In court, Harrison admitted to buying a woman for $100. Although the details of this confession were still unclear, the impact of this admission was truly seismic within the legal community and the public. For many, this was an unbelievable act, a gross violation of human dignity wrapped in a cold statement. But for Harrison, it was something much more important, an admission of what he had done to cover up his darker activities. This confession was part of a deeper investigation into Harrison's criminal activities. While he had been accused of organizing the murder of a crucial witness to protect his empire, this new revelation added another layer of crime to his image, something unimaginable to many. It was no longer just about the murder. It was about human exploitation, abuse of power, and a blatant disregard for human life that many could never have fathomed. The purchase of the woman for $100, which would later be fully exposed, was part of a disturbing pattern of behavior Harrison had been involved in for years. Law enforcement had uncovered a series of transactions showing Harrison's involvement in human trafficking, exploitation, and other illegal activities. Despite his constant claims that his wealth was built from legitimate business ventures, the evidence increasingly pointed to the fact that most of his fortune came through darker methods. The pawn shop, once viewed as the heart of his empire, was now exposed as a facade for much darker dealings. The most disturbing part of the confession about the $100 woman was not just the admission itself, but the consequences it brought. Harrison had admitted to buying a woman as if she were an object, a commodity that could be bought and sold. This was not just a simple financial transaction, it was an overt abuse of power, an example of the disregard for human rights that Harrison had shown in his pursuit of wealth and power. This confession shook the community, leaving many people wondering how someone who appeared so genuine on television could be capable of such dark deeds. For those who had followed Harrison's rise, this confession was a painful revelation. Pawn Stars was a show that had celebrated family business, business savvy, and a love for history. It was a lighthearted show that gave viewers a glimpse into the world of pawn shops and rare treasures that could be found there. Fans had admired Harrison for his knowledge, intelligence, and seemingly sincere personality. But now, the truth was beginning to surface, and it was nothing like the image he had so carefully built over the years. This confession was not just a personal revelation from Harrison, but a turning point in the case against him. The deeper the investigation went into his activities, the more it became clear that Harrison's criminal empire didn't stop at the pawn shop. The admission about the $100 woman and his involvement in trafficking and exploitation painted a picture of a man who had used his wealth and influence to manipulate those around him for his own benefit. As the investigation into Harrison's activities continued, the public's perception of him changed dramatically. The man who had once been seen as a sharp businessman, a loving father, and a respected television star was now being viewed in a much darker light. Fans, who had once looked up to him, now had to question how they had been so blind to the truth. The charming, intelligent man they had watched on TV now appeared to be a cruel individual, willing to exploit and manipulate others for his own gain. The confession about the $100 woman would not be the last shock from this case. As law enforcement continued to dig into Harrison's past, more troubling details began to emerge. The deeper they went, the clearer it became that Harrison had been involved in a series of illegal activities, some of which were even more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. However, this confession marked a pivotal moment in the investigation. It was the moment when the carefully crafted image of Rick Harrison began to collapse, exposing the full scale of his criminal empire. For many, the confession about the $100 woman was the final straw. The man who had once been a symbol of American success, a beloved television star admired by millions, was now a symbol of everything wrong in the pursuit of power and wealth. The world watched as Harrison built his empire, but now they are witnessing its collapse. And in the end, the truth is even more shocking than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation into Rick Harrison's empire continued to expand, it became increasingly clear that he had taken extreme measures to conceal the darker side of his life. For years, Harrison had been able to maintain the image of a successful businessman, a loving father, and a beloved TV star. However, as law enforcement dug deeper into his activities, it became evident that his public persona was merely a carefully crafted facade, hiding a web of illegal transactions and morally corrupt actions. The question arose, how had he managed to maintain this illusion for so long? Harrison's concealment of his crimes was not just about hiding the truth from the public. It was about protecting an empire, a multi-million-dollar business empire built on lies, manipulation, and exploitation. Harrison was not just a pawn shop owner. He was the head of a network of criminal activities that extended far beyond the pawn shop. And to safeguard his wealth and power, he was willing to take extreme measures to ensure that the truth never came to light. The key to this concealment was the resources Harrison had at his disposal. As the star of Pawn Stars, he was a household name. His wealth and fame gave him the power to reach influential people, both within and outside the business world. He had the ability to influence those around him, from employees to law enforcement, and he used these connections to manipulate the situation to his advantage. Whether through financial incentives, threats, or intimidation, Harrison worked tirelessly to keep his illegal activities from public view. One of Harrison's most effective tools was his influence over the media. As a reality TV star, he could control much of the narrative surrounding his work and personal life. Pawn Stars had become a cultural phenomenon, with millions of viewers tuning in each week to watch Harrison and his family haggle over rare items. But behind the scenes, Harrison was using his fame to protect his empire. By maintaining a clean image on television, he was able to divert attention away from his illegal activities. The show, originally intended to showcase the workings of a pawn shop, had become a shield, an instrument to prevent scrutiny of the darker aspects of his business. The fallout from the Harrison scandal spread across the pawn industry. Pawn shop owners, who had once admired Harrison for his success, now faced image problems. They were forced to distance themselves from the tarnished reputation that the scandal had brought to the forefront, causing the pawn industry to be associated with illegal activities, money laundering, and even human trafficking. The industry, which had garnered newfound respect following Pawn Stars' success, was now under intense scrutiny as media attention on Harrison's case intensified. Pawn shops across the country began reporting a decline in business. Customers, who had previously flocked to find rare treasures, were now hesitant, fearing that the pawn business might be linked to illegal activities. Many pawn shop owners took steps to improve transparency and enforce stricter regulations, but the damage had already been done. Public trust in the pawn industry had been shaken, and it would take years for it to fully recover. The rise and fall of reality TV stars, in addition to its impact on the pawn industry, had far-reaching consequences for celebrity culture and reality television. Harrison had become one of the most recognizable faces in this genre, a reality TV star who had built an empire on charm and business savvy. However, his downfall exposed the darker side of reality television, a world where fame, fortune, and success can be built on illusions, manipulation, and, in Harrison's case, illegal activities. Reality television, once praised for its unscripted nature and relatable stars, had now become the subject of widespread skepticism. The truth was that many reality TV stars like Harrison were not as real as they appeared on screen. Behind the scenes, they were often meticulously coached and scripted, exaggerating certain traits to create a more compelling story for viewers. For Harrison, the image of a savvy businessman and loving father was a carefully constructed persona, designed to make him relatable and trustworthy. However, when the truth about his illegal activities was exposed, it was clear that his public image had been nothing more than a performance. As news of Harrison's crimes spread, the public began to question the authenticity of other reality TV stars. If Harrison, who had built a massive fan base by presenting himself as a genuine businessman, could hide such dark secrets, then who else in the reality TV world was living in a lie? The scandal sparked a larger conversation about the ethics of reality television and the pressures stars face in maintaining a particular image. Many viewers began to feel disillusioned with the genre, realizing that what they saw on screen was often not the truth. Harrison's scandal also highlighted the power that reality TV stars have in shaping public opinion and influencing their audiences. For years, Pawn stars had portrayed Harrison as an expert in the world of antiques and a shrewd businessman. Fans trusted him because he seemed knowledgeable about the trade, and the show depicted him as someone who valued family, worked hard, and was honest. When the truth was revealed, that trust was shattered, raising important questions about the role of reality TV stars in shaping public perception. How much of what they present is real, and how much of it is carefully staged for entertainment purposes? The consequences for Pawn stars as the scandal surrounding Rick Harrison developed were uncertain. The show had become one of the most successful reality TV programs in history, attracting millions of viewers every week. It had made Harrison, his family, and their pawn shop household names. But now the show was tainted by the criminal activities of its star. Public perception of Pawn stars changed irreparably, and fans who had once followed the show now struggled with the realization that the person they admired was not the hero they once thought him to be. The History Channel faced a difficult decision: whether to continue airing the show despite the scandal or sever ties with Harrison and the program. Ultimately, the show was indefinitely suspended as legal proceedings against Harrison continued. The once high viewership began to plummet as audiences distanced themselves from the show. Advertisers also became hesitant to associate with Pawn stars, fearing the scandal would damage their own reputations. The decision to continue airing Pawn stars received mixed reactions. Some fans of the show were disappointed but continued watching, while others chose to boycott it completely. For many, the show had once been a symbol of family values, hard work, and the excitement of discovering valuable items, but now it was associated with corruption, deceit, and crime. The decision to keep the show on air proved to be a controversial one, and Pawn Stars would never be the same again. Rick Harrison, once the celebrated star of Pawn Stars, was now a name tied to scandal, betrayal, and criminal activities. His legacy, which had been built on a foundation of fame and business success, was now irrevocably tainted by the revelations of his criminal empire. What had once been a story about the American dream, a man making millions from humble beginnings, was now a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, power, and the lengths some will go to protect their empire. The rise and fall of a reality TV star, few in the world of reality television had achieved the level of fame that Rick Harrison did. As the patriarch of Pawn Stars, he had become a household name, with his face recognized by millions of viewers each week as he and his family haggled over antiques and rare items. Over the years, Harrison was seen as a sharp businessman who had built a successful pawn shop empire from the ground up. His approachable personality and business acumen made him a beloved figure in American households, and his success story was often cited as an example of hard work paying off. But the truth behind Harrison's rise to fame was far more complicated than the story the TV show told. While millions of fans watched his business transactions on Pawn Stars and admired his negotiating skills, few knew the truth behind the man and his empire. Harrison's carefully crafted image as a charming family man who understood the pawn industry was in stark contrast to the reality of his criminal activities. When the scandal broke, it shattered the foundation of his public image. The man who had once been admired for his business acumen and trusted as a relatable TV star was now exposed as someone who had built his empire on lies, manipulation, and illegal activities. The murder of a key witness, the confession of the $100 woman, and evidence of money laundering, human trafficking, and other crimes revealed a dark side to Harrison that few had anticipated. The public was shocked and struggled to reconcile the man they had admired with the image of a criminal mastermind who had hidden in plain sight. As details of Harrison's criminal empire were exposed, his legacy as a TV star was shattered. The man who had been beloved for making millions through negotiating rare antiques and collectibles was now seen as a criminal who had exploited people and used his fame to protect himself from the consequences of his actions. The public's perception of Harrison changed overnight, and the admiration and respect he once had vanished in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. Impact on his reputation. The scandal surrounding Rick Harrison not only affected his career, but also changed how people saw him as a person. His reputation, once built on trust and admiration, was now irreparably tarnished. Fans who had once viewed him as a down-to-earth businessman now saw him as a symbol of corruption and deceit. The carefully constructed image of Harrison as a shrewd negotiator and family man was shattered, replaced with the reality of a man who had used his power and influence to exploit others for personal gain. After the scandal, many of Harrison's fans struggled with feelings of betrayal. They had watched Pawn Stars every week, believing they were witnessing a show about honest business transactions and the thrill of uncovering hidden treasures. But the truth was much darker. Harrison's criminal activities, which had been hidden behind the TV persona, were now exposed for the world to see. The man who had been admired for his business savvy was now viewed as someone who used his fame to manipulate and control others, bending the law to serve his own interests. The fallout from Harrison's scandal also impacted public trust in reality television as a whole. Reality TV had long been criticized for presenting real-life situations that were often scripted or manipulated to create dramatic effects, but Harrison's case pushed that criticism to a new level. If a man who seemed as authentic as Harrison could hide such dark secrets, how many other reality TV stars were living double lives? This scandal sparked a larger conversation about the ethics of reality television and the dangers of creating false narratives for entertainment purposes. As details of Harrison's criminal activities were exposed, the public began to question the authenticity of reality TV stars. Many of them had built their careers on scripted personas and exaggerated stories. The impact on Harrison's reputation was amplified by the constant media coverage of the scandal. The media followed every twist and turn of his legal battle, reporting on court hearings and the details of his criminal actions. This relentless coverage painted Harrison as a villain who had betrayed his fans and exploited his position for personal gain. The public's perception of him was shaped not only by the legal proceedings, but also by the way the media portrayed him as a criminal mastermind who had been hiding in plain sight for years. For Harrison, the media coverage was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it ensured that the public would never forget his name or the crimes he had committed. On the other hand, it made any attempt to restore his public image nearly impossible. The media had already rendered its verdict on him, and the damage to his reputation was so great that it was almost beyond repair. As the scandal erupted and Harrison's reputation crumbled, the future of Pawn Stars grew increasingly uncertain. The show, which had been a staple of the History Channel for years, was now tainted by the criminal activities of its star. Fans who had once watched Harrison haggle over antiques and rare items began to question the authenticity of the show. How much of what they saw on television was real? How many transactions and interactions had been scripted or manipulated for entertainment purposes? The television network also found itself in a difficult position. While Pawn Stars had been a monster in terms of ratings for many years, the scandal surrounding Harrison's criminal activities cast doubt on the future of the show. The History Channel was faced with a choice: continue airing the show despite the controversy, or sever ties with Harrison and end the program. After careful consideration, the network decided to suspend Pawn Stars indefinitely. This decision received mixed reactions. Some fans were disappointed but continued watching, while others felt that the show could no longer be enjoyed with the shadow of Harrison's scandal looming over it. For Harrison, the end of Pawn Stars marked the end of his television career. The show had made him a star, but it was also the show that exposed the dark side of his life. No longer the beloved family man or sharp businessman, Harrison had become a symbol of everything that was wrong with reality television: manipulation, deceit, and betrayal. His career, once seen as a success story, had now become a cautionary tale about how fame and power can corrupt even the most relatable and charismatic celebrities. Thank you for watching the video. This is a story full of surprises and the truth behind the glitz and glamour of reality TV stars. Leave your thoughts in the comments about what you think of this case. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to keep up